ragtag medieval witch trial script. Imagine sitting in a crowded village square as your mother is dragged to a wooden stake, her screams echoing off stone walls, while neighbors you've known your entire life cheer for her flesh to burn. This wasn't a nightmare. This was everyday reality during Europe's witch trial hysteria, a period of mass psychosis that's been thoroughly sanitized in our history books. The true story of Europe's witch trials is far more disturbing than the Halloween caricatures we've created. Between 1450 and 1750, over 80,000 suspected witches were systematically tortured and executed, 80% of them women. But what they endured before death remains one of history's most disturbing chapters that few textbooks dare to explore in detail. Take Agnes Waterhouse, England's first woman executed for witchcraft in 1566. Court documents reveal she wasn't simply hanged. First, interrogators stripped her naked before the all-male court to search for the devil's mark, any mole, birthmark, or skin tag they could claim was evidence. Finding a small mark on her upper thigh, they drove a long pin through it repeatedly. When she failed to bleed or react properly due to shock, this became proof of her supernatural nature. The methods used to extract confessions were designed to maximize pain without causing immediate death. The strappado technique hoisted victims by their arms tied behind their back, dislocating shoulder joints while interrogators demanded confessions. Records from the Bamberg witch trials document how one woman, Anna Miller, endured this for 6 hours before finally admitting she caused hailstorms by stirring urine in a bowl under the full moon, absurd details her torturers specifically suggested to her. What's particularly disturbing is how witch hunting became a profitable industry. Professional witch finders like Matthew Hopkins charged villages substantial fees to identify witches. Hopkins pioneered the swimming test where women were bound and thrown into ponds. The perverse logic: those who floated were witches rejecting the holy water, those who sank and drowned were innocent. The accused quite literally couldn't win. Witch trial records from Würzburg, Germany, reveal the economic incentives driving this madness. When a wealthy merchant's wife was accused, her property was seized and divided among the court, accusers, and local officials. Within months, 3 more wealthy widows faced identical accusations from the same officials. This wasn't superstition. It was calculated theft using torture as the mechanism. Court documents from 1628 described the case of Catherine de Shays, accused of witchcraft after her neighbor's cow died unexpectedly. During her interrogation, executioners applied thumbscrews. Metal vices slowly tightened around fingers until bones shattered. Unable to withstand the pain, she confessed not only to killing the cow but to poisoning wells, causing crop failures, and having sexual relations with demons. Every absurd confession was meticulously recorded as fact. Perhaps most shocking is how witch trials specifically targeted female healers and midwives, effectively dismantling women's traditional medical knowledge. The 1486 Handbook for Witch Hunters, the Malleus Maleficarum, explicitly states, "No one does more harm to the Catholic faith than midwives." When a pregnancy resulted in stillbirth, midwives frequently faced accusations of sacrificing the child to dark forces. Their specialized knowledge of herbal medicine and reproductive care was reframed as evidence of diabolical power. The true psychological horror went beyond physical torture. Accused witches faced excruciating isolation as entire communities turned against them. In the 1612 Pendle witch trials in England, daughter was forced to testify against mother, husband against wife. Historical records show how Elizabeth Clark, an elderly one-legged woman, was kept awake for 3 consecutive nights until sleep deprivation induced hallucinations that were recorded as confessions about demonic encounters. But here's what you weren't taught in school. The witch trials weren't driven primarily by peasant superstition. They were systematically organized by educated officials, judges, and local authorities who created elaborate legal frameworks for these proceedings. The University of Tübingen actively developed scientific methods for identifying witches, including precisely measured water displacement tests to determine if a woman's body had unnatural buoyancy. Archaeological evidence from execution sites reveals another disturbing practice. At Bideford, in England, excavated remains showed that many executed witches had metal spikes driven through their hearts after death. This wasn't mentioned in official execution records. The practice, done secretly and at additional expense, reveals how deeply the educated executioners themselves feared the women they killed. The children caught in this hysteria faced particularly grim fates. Court records from Salem detail how 4-year-old Dorothy Good was kept chained in a dungeon for 9 months after confessing to witchcraft. When finally released, she had gone completely insane from the trauma and isolation. Her mother, Sarah Good, executed during her pregnancy, represents thousands of similar victims whose names history has conveniently forgotten. What's truly haunting is how medical conditions we easily recognize today drove many accusations. Court testimonies describing bewitched children often include classic symptoms of epilepsy, Huntington's chorea, or ergot poisoning from contaminated grain. Women suffering from dementia or schizophrenia were particularly vulnerable to accusations when they spoke incoherently or claimed to hear voices. One disturbing pattern emerges in nearly every witch trial: sexual humiliation. Court-appointed searchers, typically male, were authorized to examine women's bodies intimately for devil's marks. These examinations, conducted publicly, included shaving body hair and probing genitalia for insensitive spots. The 1661 trial of Scottish woman Agnes Sampson records how she was stripped, shaven in all parts of her body, and pricked with pins to her great torment before being garroted and burned. The industrial scale of certain witch hunts defies comprehension. In Bamberg, Germany, Prince Bishop Gottfried Johann Georg constructed a specialized witch house with a torture chamber where over 600 people were systematically processed and executed over 5 years. Detailed accounting ledgers show how each execution cost was calculated, including separate charges for the wood, chains, and executioner's fee, all billed to the victim's estate. Perhaps the most chilling aspect is how witch trials spread like contagion. Once accusations began in a village, they rarely stopped with one victim. Under torture, the accused would name accomplices, usually friends or family members, creating exponential growth in accusations. In the small German town of Ellwangen, a witch trial beginning with one woman in 1611 eventually claimed 400 lives, nearly 30% of the town's adult female population. We must confront an uncomfortable truth. These weren't primitive, uneducated societies. The most intense witch hunting coincided with the early Enlightenment, when universities flourished and scientific inquiry was advancing. These atrocities happened in the same era when Newton developed calculus and Harvey discovered blood circulation. The sophisticated legal framework supporting witch trials was developed by Europe's leading intellectual authorities. The legacy of the witch trials continues to shadow us. The systematic demonization of female knowledge and autonomy created enduring stereotypes about women's hysteria, an irrationality that persisted in medicine and law for centuries. The witch trials effectively silenced women from positions of knowledge and authority, with repercussions still felt in gender disparities today. When we sanitize this history into cartoonish Halloween decorations of green-faced hags, we dishonor the very real victims who died screaming in unimaginable pain. Most maintain their innocence to their final breath. Their story isn't one of superstition. It's a carefully orchestrated campaign of terror that used torture, legal systems, and economic incentives to control populations through fear. Next time you see a pointed black hat or a cartoon witch on a broomstick, remember the thousands of women who were systematically tortured, sexually humiliated, and murdered by their own communities, not in some distant primitive path, but in societies with universities, courts, and advanced legal systems. Their crime wasn't witchcraft. It was existing in a world determined to find monsters among its most vulnerable members.